This video is part 4 of my 3-part investigation into creating a state-supported passenger rail network here in Utah. This system comes in 3 segments, radiating out from Provo, and the surface pattern looks like this, with 2 lines each connecting the Wasatch Corridor to the rest of the state. Once we add in the 1 current and 2 proposed long-distance trains through Utah, we end up with an amazingly comprehensive rail map. In this video, I'm going to make the pitch for 1 more rail line to be added to our map. This line has a lower probability for completion than the other 2, mainly because it runs through 3 states, which makes funding and administration a lot more difficult. However, in every other respect, this line has amazing potential, both in current traffic demands and in future population growth. This is the route north from Salt Lake City, through eastern Idaho, and on to West Yellowstone, Montana. If you haven't heard of this line before, that is because the last 50 miles into Montana were abandoned in the 1980s and have since become an ATV and now a bike trail north of Ashton, Idaho. But in its prime, this branch line was the host for several prominent Union Pacific named trains and advertising campaigns, including the Yellowstone Special, the Yellowstone Express, and, of course, the Yellowstone Bears, which were mascots that the railroad created and promoted in order to generate more interest in the national park. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, more tourists arrived to Yellowstone by the Union Pacific than every other entrance combined, and the route remained popular all the way up into the 1960s. Between Utah and Yellowstone is my childhood home in the Snake River Valley of eastern Idaho. While this is still a mostly rural and agricultural area, it is dotted with some fast-growing cities and universities in Pocatello, Idaho Falls, and Rexburg. The largest cities conveniently form a straight line along the Snake River, creating an ideal travel corridor similar to the Wasatch Front, with a population of 350,000 and climbing. By recent counts, Idaho is one of the top 5 fastest-growing states in the Union, ahead of even Utah. Still, and similar to our previous 2 routes to Moab and Cedar City, the key to achieving sufficient ridership to justify rail service will be providing access to a prominent national park. Yellowstone is the world's oldest and possibly most famous national park, and sees over 4 million visitors per year, making it the 4th most visited national park in America. Grand Teton National Park is directly south of Yellowstone and sees well over 3 million visitors per year. These parks are served by the Bozeman, Montana, and the Jackson Hole, Wyoming airports, which are smaller facilities meant to accommodate seasonal, short-haul aviation, with a significant number of flights connecting to bigger planes at Denver, Minneapolis, and Salt Lake City. And if a significant number of people are already flying through Salt Lake City or Denver, why not allow them to leave the airport, see the sights here in Salt Lake, then travel to Yellowstone in the comfort that only a train can provide? Departing from the beautiful Rio Grande Depot in downtown Salt Lake City, we head north on the Wasatch Corridor for 85 miles up to Cache Junction, making the usual stops in Ogden and Brigham City. Unlike the 2 state-supported routes that both terminate in Logan, our Yellowstone service will continue due north, taking the same tracks as the future long-distance route to Boise. A transit connection, preferably sharing the state-supported rail corridor between the Logan Airport and the city center, would be very welcome, because our Yellowstone trains will not have time to double back into and out of the city. North of Cache Junction, we find ourselves again on the Ogden subdivision from the first video. From Cache Junction to McCammon, Idaho, the railroad has a single track with sparse sidings and even lighter through traffic. Since it was originally laid out as a narrow-gauge line in the 1870s, there are a few tight curves with even tighter speeds, but as you can see, improvements to most of these curves would not be difficult to construct. Like the Wasatch Corridor and the route to Cedar City, we will be creating 2 timetables, one for a present-day service with an average speed of 60 miles per hour, and one for a future service on upgraded tracks that allow for an average speed of up to 80 miles per hour. After passing along the west side of Cache Valley, crossing the state line into Idaho, threading through Red Rock Pass, and descending into Marsh Valley, we finally reach McCammon, Idaho, where the Ogden subdivision joins with the Pocatello subdivision. This double-track line is part of a major east-west corridor for Union Pacific, connecting transcontinental traffic from the Pacific Northwest to Chicago. Like Lyndall, or Crescent Junction in previous videos, this junction will be our token flag stop station, with possible connections by road, or even rail, to Lava Hot Springs, just 10 miles up the canyon from McCammon. North of McCammon, we follow the Portneuf River for 22.5 miles into Pocatello. Even though we're running parallel with Interstate 15 again, the deep lava rock cliffs beside the river keep the freeway out of sight until the last few miles. This section of the Pocatello subdivision is fully double-tracked, with full crossovers every 8 miles or so, so despite the flow of transcontinental freight traffic, I don't expect any delays here. Pocatello is a major refueling and crew change point, where Union Pacific continues to use its historic depot for crew and office space. This may pose an interesting problem for the future long-distance train to Boise, but it won't affect us, since our Yellowstone train will need to stop at the northeast side of the yard in order to be lined up for the next segment of our journey. My hope is that our new platform can eventually be connected to the reopened historic depot by an enclosed pedestrian bridge, perhaps attaching the station to a second, modern station building on the east side of the yard. Such a feature would be very useful in reconnecting this very divided city. Let's look at travel times so far. Salt Lake City to Pocatello at current speeds would take approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes, which is a full hour slower than the freeway, which is able to take a direct route 37 miles shorter than our rail route. Using upgraded tracks, we could shave 50 minutes off our travel time and get something much more competitive with the personal automobile. Departing Pocatello, we turn north immediately onto the Montana subdivision. This line dates back to the 1870s as the original Utah and Northern Railway, the first railroad in both Idaho and Montana. Despite the longevity, the mines in Butte are not generating as much rail traffic as they did a century ago. Currently, Union Pacific generally runs only 2 or 3 trains per day here, so our passenger trains will essentially have the run of the place all the way up to Yellowstone. We will make 2 stops on the Montana subdivision, one in Blackfoot and the other in Idaho Falls. Blackfoot has done an excellent job of preserving their beautiful stone station, which is currently used as the Idaho Potato Museum and Cafe. Idaho Falls replaced their train station with a parking lot, which is really too bad since a busy train station is exactly what the city needs to keep reactivating their historic downtown. Looking at our travel times, a trip to Idaho Falls from Salt Lake City will currently take 4 hours and 10 minutes. With upgraded tracks, we can cut out 63 minutes for a total of 3 hours and 7 minutes. North of Idaho Falls, we encounter, for the first time in this series, a railroad that is not Union Pacific, though it does operate on a line once owned by them. The 50-mile line from Idaho Falls to Ashton is owned and operated by the Eastern Idaho Railroad, which runs 1 train per day out and back from Idaho Falls. Track speeds are generally maintained to a rough Class 3 standard, or 60 miles per hour max for passengers, even though it was originally constructed to a much higher standard. At one time, so many tourist trains ran here that a second track and a centralized traffic control system were seriously considered. Though it would take significant amounts of work, nothing physical is preventing us from restoring this line to high speeds. We will make only 1 intermediate stop before reaching the end of line in Ashton, and that stop is my old hometown of Rexburg, at milepost 25. Thanks to the large city blocks, the same size as Salt Lake City in fact, there is exactly enough space to hold our 6-car Aero train set at the historic station site on Main Street. Rexburg is home to 40,000 permanent residents and 24,000 college students at BYU, Idaho. Rail service here opens up the possibility of connecting the 2 BYUs by train, allowing departments and students much easier collaboration. Heading north of Rexburg, we pass through the small communities of Sugar City and St. Anthony, where we encounter our first major curve in over 50 miles, proving that we have finally reached the top of the Snake River Plain at 5,000 feet above sea level. Over the next 50 miles, we will gain another 2,000 feet in elevation. Ashton, Idaho, located 25 miles north of Rexburg, is not a large population center, but it is the current railhead, so I've placed a station there. Ashton is also the closest station to Grand Teton National Park, and it is likely that many passengers may want to board or exit the train here, based on how they want to tour the national parks. At one point, a branch line from Ashton to Victor, Idaho, got even closer to Teton National Park, and today it is a very scenic bike trail, which I highly recommend. North of Ashton, the line to Yellowstone is also now a trail, but for this video, we are going to put the tracks back. I would love to do an entire video about the Yellowstone branch of the Union Pacific. It's been my passion ever since I first rode the Warm River Rail Trail as a kid. However, this isn't that video. So in summary, the northern half of this line passes through some seriously challenging but very scenic terrain. In fact, back in the day, the Union Pacific ordered specially designed locomotives specifically for this section of the line, with smaller diameter wheels in order to handle both the grades and curves while still maintaining passenger speeds in the flat country. The first challenge is the 2.5% climb into the volcanic caldera, parallel to the Warm River, which happens immediately north of Ashton. Once inside the caldera, the line passes close to Mesa Falls, exits the caldera at Trude, crosses the North Fork of the Snake River, better known as Henry's Fork, at Big Springs, then climbs up and over the Continental Divide at Rees Pass, before arriving at West Yellowstone, Montana. The city of West Yellowstone, originally called Riverside, since this is where the Madison River exits the park boundaries, was laid out by the railroad, and is home to a truly magnificent train station, which is now used as a museum. All of these highlights are packed into a right-of-way that is only 56.3 miles long. I am convinced that this line would be celebrated as a major tourist attraction today if it had not been torn out in 1981. Once it is rebuilt, I am just as confident that it will become a major visitor attractor once again. Although my favorite section is the Warm River Canyon, the 16.5 miles between West Yellowstone and Big Springs up and over the Continental Divide seem ideally created for day excursions for summer visitors. There are, after all, only 7 locations in the United States where railroads cross the Continental Divide. This would be the 8th, and it would be the only dedicated passenger line to do so. And just to restate the obvious, this is not a new line. The historic right-of-way is still present and is used as a series of public roads and trails. With a bit of roadbed restoration and accommodations to offset the trails to one side or the other, the land is essentially ready right now for the tracks to go back. But what to do with our passengers once they reach West Yellowstone? Yellowstone does not have a park-wide shuttle bus system like Zion National Park, or even the capacity issues of Arches National Park. And due to the enormous size of Yellowstone, a fixed-route bus network is probably not feasible anyway. The only solution that I see is the technological one. I've held back in previous videos about the potential for autonomous road vehicles, but with news reports of robotaxi services expanding every month, I feel it's time to look forward. While I do not see a future where private vehicles are outright banned from Yellowstone, I do predict that using a personal vehicle and parking it within park boundaries will incur enough extra fees that most visitors will prefer to use the park's own robotaxi fleet. These fleet vehicles can drop off guests at trailheads or attractions, then pick up waiting guests, and never need to crowd up the parking areas while idle. Significant areas of the park that have already been paved over for unneeded personal vehicles can be returned to a natural state, or repurposed for other guest services, depending on the location. This is going to happen with or without our train service from Salt Lake City to Yellowstone. The advantages are just too great to ignore. With the ecosystem of shuttles and taxis firmly established, demand for rail travel across long distances will increase substantially. Cars, shuttles, buses, or any other kind of highway travel cannot compete with passenger rail for comfort and amenities. This is true not just for Yellowstone, but for every national park and every city that we've stopped at in all of our tours. The combination of door-to-door automatic road service combined with fast, convenient passenger trains will bring significant changes in how Americans choose to travel. The pendulum is about to swing back hard in favor of travel by train. In the Mountain West, the city that stands to benefit the most from this change is definitely Salt Lake City. Our airport is located centrally between 8 major national parks. These are Zion, Bryce Canyon, Capitol Reef, Canyonlands, and Arches, all in Utah. The north rim of the Grand Canyon, the obvious better rim, is only an hour-and-a-half drive from Kanab, and a 2.5-hour drive from Springdale and Zion National Park. And, of course, there is Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks to the north. No other urban area has the same level of access to world-famous natural wonders as Salt Lake City. Linking these destinations by train will establish us as the national park's capital and produce enormous economic returns for the city and state. But because this network will be so unique, it will also require real leadership to construct. We cannot be merely followers. We have to be trendsetters. Of course, national parks aren't the only reason to build better rail service. There are millions of people in Utah, Idaho, and other states that stand to benefit by having faster, more reliable connections to each other and to the urban core of Salt Lake City. Patients and family traveling to hospitals, fans converging for a sports event, or for a convention, or for a conference, business owners headed to meetings via the airport, families sending or receiving their children home from universities or to new homes in growing cities across the Mountain West. And what better way to connect all these cities and family and people together than by trains that travel through beautiful places? My hope through this series has been to show that passenger trains are once again a real and viable mode of transportation. Trains offer not just the potential to alleviate congestion on our roadways and our airports, but can increase travel demand and interest that was never there before, and can bolster our image and our economy in ways that additional pavement never can. To those of us who love our state as our home and want to see it grow and prosper, it's time for us to catch a train. I'm Christian Lenhart. Thank you for watching.